What if the people who promised to love and protect you became your worst nightmare? Imagine being adopted, thinking you've finally found a family, a home, a place where you belong. But instead of warmth and safety, you're locked in a cold, dark barn. No food, no water, no way to escape, just concrete floors beneath you and the suffocating fear that this is your life. No, this isn't fiction. This is the heartbreaking reality for 5 innocent black children who were adopted, not out of love, but out of cruelty. They were targeted because of the color of their skin, abused, isolated, forced to live like animals, hidden from the world. Before we go any further, if you love deep dives into real life cases that will leave you speechless, take a second to subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you these stories, and honestly, we love having you here. The way you engage, the way you stick around and process these cases with us, it means a lot. Now, let's get into it. Today, we're diving deep into the horrifying case of Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather, a story that will shake you to your core. On the surface, Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather seemed like any other couple. They blended into their community, keeping up appearances with polite smiles and friendly waves. To the casual observer, they were a couple who had opened their hearts and home to 5 adopted children, an act most would call selfless, even heroic. Neighbors described them as quiet but kind, the type you'd nod at while mowing your lawn or see at the local grocery store, cart full of family essentials. But that was just a facade, the perfect lie. Donald and Jeanne wore the mask of benevolence well. They spun a narrative of being saviors, people who had stepped up to give underprivileged children a better life. Their story painted them as compassionate, charitable individuals driven by a mission to make a difference. They'd occasionally post carefully curated photos on social media, family outings, staged smiles, and captions about blessings and gratitude. To their online friends and acquaintances, they were admirable, a family built on love, not blood. But behind closed doors, their home was a prison. Their adoption story wasn't one of compassion. It was a calculated move. Some speculate they pursued adoption for financial benefits, exploiting government assistance meant to support the children's well-being. Others believe they craved control, targeting vulnerable black children precisely because they thought no one would question their authority or care enough to intervene. While they paraded as model parents in public, inside their home, and worse, inside that barn, the reality was a living nightmare. The children were stripped of dignity, treated not as sons and daughters, but as property. They weren't part of a family. They were trapped in a cycle of abuse hidden behind the walls of a seemingly ordinary life. Neighbors never suspected a thing. They seemed normal, one would later say, but that's the chilling part about evil. It often hides in plain sight, masked by ordinary smiles and the illusion of kindness. At first, it probably seemed like a fresh start for the kids. New home, new family, maybe even hope. But that illusion shattered quickly. The signs of control were subtle at first. Strict rules, no contact with friends, limited time outside. Jeanne and Donald isolated the children, cutting them off from the world, making sure no one could hear their cries for help. It wasn't just about physical control, it was psychological warfare. They broke them down emotionally, using manipulation and fear to strip away any sense of safety. The shift from parents to captors didn't happen overnight, but when it did, it was brutal. The abuse escalated fast. The children weren't treated as part of the family, they were treated as slaves, forced to work, denied basic human rights, and punished for the smallest mistakes. Locked in a barn like animals, no running water, no bathroom, no food, just cold concrete floors, open sores on their feet, and the suffocating stench of neglect. Why these kids? Because of their race. Donald and Jeanne didn't just abuse them, they targeted them. Their blackness made them targets in the eyes of their so-called parents, who exploited them without an ounce of remorse. This wasn't just neglect, it was a calculated, racially motivated campaign of cruelty. And the worst part? No one knew, no one saw, no one stopped it. Until it was almost too late. Imagine waking up every day in a cold, dark barn. Not a cozy room with posters on the walls or the warmth of family photos, but a barren space with concrete floors that feel like ice against your skin. No bed, no blanket, just the hard, unyielding ground beneath you. This was the daily reality for the 5 children adopted by Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather. There was no running water, no bathroom. When nature called, the children had no choice but to find a corner or soil themselves, living in filth with the overwhelming stench of neglect clinging to the air. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs relentlessly. Food wasn't a guarantee, it was a privilege they rarely received. Some days, scraps tossed on the floor like they were feeding animals. Other days, nothing at all. Their bare feet were covered in open sores, raw from walking on rough concrete and jagged wooden planks. Dirt embedded in their skin, their hair matted and tangled, they smelled of sweat, urine, and despair, a pungent reminder of their captivity. No one cared, no one came to help. Their cries for mercy echoed only within the barn's hollow wall. You picture one of the children, a young boy, maybe 10. He stares at the sliver of light peeking through a crack in the barn door, imagining what life outside might be like. Does he remember what freedom felt like? Maybe he thinks about a day at the park, the sound of laughter, the warmth of the sun on his face. But those memories are fading, swallowed by the endless darkness he's trapped in now. The emotional toll was just as brutal as the physical. They were treated like property, dehumanized to the point where they probably questioned their own worth. Jeanne and Donald stripped them of more than just basic necessities. They stole their dignity, their hope, their belief that kindness could exist in the world. Janie's voice would cut through the silence like a blade, barking orders with no trace of affection. Donald's presence was a looming threat, his shadow alone enough to send shivers of fear through their fragile bodies. They weren't children in that barn, they were prisoners, slaves in a house masquerading as a home. Each night, as they lay on the cold, hard floor, they faced the same question. Will tomorrow be worse? But even in that nightmare, maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope lingered. Because hope is stubborn like that, refusing to die even when everything else feels lost. The nightmare these children endured didn't happen in total secrecy. There were red flags, whispers of something wrong hidden beneath the surface. Neighbors occasionally noticed odd things. The children were rarely seen outside, and when they were, they appeared withdrawn, thin, and oddly quiet. No laughter, no play, just hollow stares that spoke volumes. Some neighbors thought it was strange but shrugged it off, convincing themselves that maybe the kids were just shy. School officials noticed absences piling up, unexplained injuries, and signs of neglect. But each time, Jeanne and Donald had an excuse ready. They're homeschooled now, they'd say, or she's feeling under the weather. Their words wrapped in just enough charm and authority to avoid deeper questioning. They painted a picture of a loving family, managing personal challenges, skillfully manipulating anyone who dared to look too closely. Family services? Yes, they were contacted at times, reports were made, but the couple knew how to play the system. Clean, tidy living spaces, staged for visits, polite smiles, and well-rehearsed stories masked the horror behind closed doors. The barn where the children were locked away was hidden, never part of the tour. Authorities left, paperwork filed away, and the abuse continued. Donald and Jeanne's manipulation wasn't just external, it extended to the children themselves. They instilled fear with threats. If you tell anyone, we'll make it worse. The kids were trapped not only physically but mentally, convinced that speaking out would bring more pain or even cost them their lives. Fear became their language, silence their only defense. The tragic part? There were moments when help was within reach. A bruised arm noticed at a grocery store, a neighbor hearing faint cries but dismissing it as kids being kids. These missed opportunities were windows into the hidden world of abuse, but no one climbed through. This wasn't just a failure of one person, it was a collective failure. A community that looked the other way, systems that didn't dig deep enough, and a society that often misses the signs until it's too late. The question lingers, how many more signs do we overlook every day? It all started with a call. A concerned neighbor who couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. They'd seen too little of the children, heard unsettling noises, and noticed that the couple's behavior seemed off. The call triggered a wellness check, one that would uncover horrors beyond anyone's imagination. When officers arrived at Jeanne and Donald's property, everything seemed eerily quiet. The house appeared normal at first glance, nothing to suggest the nightmare hidden just a few steps away. But then they noticed the barn. It looked ordinary from the outside, but something felt wrong. A heavy padlock secured the door, and there was an unsettling silence that sent chills down the officer's spine with a sense of urgency. They broke the lock and opened the doors. What they found inside was beyond shocking. The barn was dark, damp, and filled with the stench of human suffering. There were no beds, Just a cold, concrete floor where the children were forced to sleep. No blankets, no pillows, nothing to provide comfort. The children, frail and malnourished, cowered in the corners, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Their bare feet were covered in open sores, and the smell of neglect was overwhelming. They were dirty, their clothes tattered, their bodies thin from starvation. The officers stood frozen for a moment, processing the unimaginable scene. Then instinct kicked in. They rushed to the children, offering words of comfort, trying to ease their terror, but these kids didn't know what kindness felt like. They flinched at every movement, every word, conditioned to expect pain. Medical teams arrived quickly, assessing the children's physical conditions. Dehydration, malnutrition, infections, the list of health issues was heartbreaking. But beyond the physical wounds were the invisible scars, the emotional trauma etched into their young minds. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the children saw daylight without fear. They breathed air without the weight of chains, literal and metaphorical. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a rebirth. But freedom came with confusion and overwhelming fear. They didn't know what it meant to be safe. They didn't know who to trust. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of medical care, interviews, and trying to piece together the nightmare they had survived. Social workers, therapists, and law enforcement worked tirelessly to ensure the children received the support they desperately needed. But healing from such deep wounds isn't easy. It's a long, painful journey, a journey that started the moment those barn doors were opened, revealing the dark secret that Donald and Jeanne had tried so hard to keep hidden. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the moment the truth finally saw the light. After the barn doors swung open and the children were rescued from their nightmare, the road to healing began, but it's a journey filled with scars, both visible and invisible. These 5 children, once stripped of their dignity and treated as less than human, are now safe. They've been placed in the care of compassionate families, surrounded by people determined to rebuild the trust and love that was stolen from them. Therapists and counselors are helping them piece together their shattered sense of self, guiding them through the trauma that still lingers in their minds. Nightmares may haunt their sleep and the echoes of fear may creep into their days, but for the first time, they have hope. They are more than survivors, they are fighters, reclaiming their voices one day at a time. Yet this story isn't just about their resilience, it's a harsh reflection of the systemic failures that allowed this horror to fester. The missed signs, the ignored cries, the paperwork filed and forgotten. How many chances did the world have to save them sooner? How many moments slipped through the cracks? Donald Ray Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather faced the justice they tried to escape. Jeanne was sentenced to 215 years in prison, while Donald received 140 years, a lifetime behind bars, though no sentence could ever erase the pain they caused. These children were treated as less than human, but their story reminds us why we must never ignore the signs. Evil can hide behind a smiling face and a family photo, but justice has a way of finding the truth. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and reflect, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, not just for more stories, but to be part of a community that refuses to turn a blind eye. Together, we can keep these voices alive, shining a light on the darkness that others try to hide. Thank you for watching.